This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your friends with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, welcome, my lovely lumps. Or maybe let's go with lovely labs. That's pretty on brand. Anyway, I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to be yarning about all things sexuality, intimacy, womanhood, relating, holistic health, and everything in between. We're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up because you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and hopefully have a bit of a chuckle while you're at it. Before we get stuck in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's a massive privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I just want to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up the couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start. Hello, my labial lovers. Welcome back to the lounge. This week, I'm joined by the brilliant Mia Findlay, eating disorder recovery coach, advocate, and all-around fucking lejo. A fellow Aussie. I feel like I can get away with calling her a fucking lejo, even though I don't know her. She's here to help us unpack diet culture, disordered eating, and recovery in a society that really grooms us to feel as though our bodies and our weight and our appearance and how disciplined we are around food and exercise are intrinsically tied to our self-worth as humans. So we're going to hear about Mia's personal story with an eating disorder and her approach to recovery, ways of navigating this stuff if you have a loved one that's battling with an eating disorder, or if you yourself have some disordered patterns going on. And we'll cover some of the more misunderstood or little known elements of this very insidious type of mental illness. So Mia's really passionate advocate for women's wellbeing and safety. After navigating her own journey with an eating disorder, she's become a leading voice for awareness, compassion, and systemic change in how we support recovery. Her advocacy extends to women's safety, where she champions initiatives that create safer spaces and amplify women's voices. And I'm actually getting goosebumps right now. I'm really excited to chat to you, Mia. So welcome to the Labia Lounge.
Thank you so much for having me. As you said, it's so nice to chat to a fellow Aussie. And we were just saying we didn't have to do any timeanddate.com converting to get this going. So admin was super simple. Love that for a Friday morning.
I know. It's one of the first podcasts in ages that I haven't had some sort of tech, kerfuffle sort of setting us back. We just launched straight in and I'm almost like, wow, that was so easy. No lube. Like, let's go.
Straight in.
Well, speaking of straight in, do you want to share a little bit about your own experience with an eating disorder and what your recovery journey has looked like?
Sure. I apologise if I go into a little bit of a monologue. I kind of have these
go for it.
chapters that lead into each other, and it's been a long time now. The story just gets longer. So I developed an eating disorder at 19. And I think probably the journey had started before then. I had never really felt connected to my body from a young age. I was always a bigger kid, and that's by height and size. I'm almost 6 foot tall now. That started happening when I was 11, turning 12. I had to have crutches because I had growing pains.
Oh my
Laugh
God.
now, but it was a little traumatic in year 6.
Horrific.
And so it really literally stood out, and a lot of focus was on my body from a very young age, and not a lot of it positive. And just the commenting on it and the comparison of me to cousins and siblings, it just made me stick out in a way that just made me so self-conscious. And we just want to belong as kids. We just kind of want to hit the average, you know? And in terms of my appearance, that just never happened. I just always felt like I was under a microscope. So was kind of the fertile ground there for my eating disorder to come in at 19, had experienced a few traumatic things in my first year of uni, already such a disruptive time of life anyway, and had gone from a very sheltered like boarding school experience to being out in the world. My family fell apart and disintegrated. My parents, my mum and my stepfather went through a really acrimonious divorce that I was kind of put right in the middle of. And so my brain just kind of tried to grab onto something to survive, and it grabbed onto an eating disorder because they are inherently these very maladaptive coping mechanisms, but they are still coping mechanisms. So it really started pretty innocuously, as it does for so many people, with me trying to change my body because I thought that that would make me feel better and that that would make me a more acceptable and worthy person when my mood was so low and my sense of self was so awful and my identity had been really shaken by all these experiences I had, and very quickly devolved into something that was just totally out of my control, heavy restricting, and then periods of binging and purging. So that's more commonly known as anorexia binge purge subtype. I don't like to focus too much on diagnoses because we know that there are so many people suffering who don't fall into those really strict siloed labels.
Yep.
And so we talk more in my work about like behavioral profiles, right? Because everyone's an individual, and all eating disorders and disordered eating are serious and deserve help and treatment. We don't need a diagnosis for that to be true. So I really flew under the radar. Being a perfectionist, as many people with eating disorders are, it was also very important to me that no one knew what was going on. So on the surface, I worked, I had a social life, I moved to London for a year, but behind the scenes, I was just falling apart. My mental health was terrible. I was incredibly depressed, incredibly anxious. My hair was falling out. I was developing rosacea on my face because my gut health was so bad because of the behaviours I was using. And I kept it all really, really hidden. And it wasn't even actually the physical aspect of my eating disorder which put me at the greatest risk. It was my mental health. So then at the age of 25, after, just completely unraveling, at this point I had no job. I wasn't speaking to my family. I wasn't speaking to my friends. I was totally isolated and highly suicidal. I'd been dealing with suicide ideation intensely for about 12 months prior. And it was because I made an attempt on my life. That was my bridge to getting help, which is why in the work I do, I put such an emphasis on the fact that these are mental illnesses, which sometimes, not always, come with physical symptoms. And we lose most people to their mental health, not actually the physical symptoms. And for whatever reason, on the first day I went into recovery, I took a video on my iPad just to kind of mark the moment, and was talking about my hope that I could just get through the week. And in August of this year, it was my 13-year recovery anniversary from that video. And it's up on YouTube because I ran out of room on my iPad, so I started putting them on YouTube. Thinking no one's going to see this. People saw them. That's why we're here talking. And documented my journey. I was very lucky to get better. And as I was making these videos, was hearing from people saying, I can't get access to treatment, started learning the stats. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate and the lowest funding. That just seemed so wrong to me. And so I started pivoting more towards advocacy, which led to me working with the Butterfly Foundation for 8 years as their ambassador, and then started my business as an eating disorder recovery coach about 8.5 years ago. Have staff in Dubai, another employee in Australia who's actually a former client of mine. It's been this amazing full circle happy accident from uploading that first video. And then more recently have moved into also more specific women's safety content as well, which all I think falls under similar umbrellas of feminism and, issues which are important to women. So, that's kind of how I ended up where I am today, and none of it was very intentional, but I am very grateful for, the full story to, full wellness, and also being able to hopefully be a part of other people's stories too.
Mm. Oh my God. Wow. Epic. So cool that you started documenting it and it just became, I guess, part of your recovery story. I imagine the fact that there was maybe this added layer of accountability once you started doing advocacy and, you were living and breathing this. Do you feel like that helped keep you on track and not kind of
Mm.
relapse too badly or?
I think it did. The recovery community was minuscule back then. It's a huge engine now. There's a lot of people, especially context wise. Instagram hadn't even launched when I was uploading videos at the beginning, which is, oh my God, can we even remember that world? It's like another dimension. So, with the proliferation of all these new social media platforms, it's like an industry in and of itself, recovery content. So I'm really grateful that I was there during the time I was there, because the community was very small. So it was interesting because, there was accountability, but it was genuinely inspirational to have this community of other creators who were trying to recover and sharing their experiences. And if they were a little bit further along than you, they'd be encouraging, being like, I know this part's really hard, but if you just get through, you just try this, or here's this great resource. It was a really wonderful community. And also being able to see your progress. If I was having a hard day, I'd go back and watch an earlier video and be like, I don't even recognize that girl. So I am further along than I'm probably giving myself credit for, and we are not going back there. So it's even now, I'll sometimes go back and watch those early videos, and it's like watching a little sister and being like, oh my God, you poor thing. I just want to wrap you up in a hug.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like as you're sort of talking about, I mean, eating disorders have among the highest mortality and suicide rates of all mental health, psychiatric disorders. And I don't know if this is still correct sort of stats, but the average time that it takes for survivors to kind of kick it to the curb is like around 7 years or something. Is that
I
right?
think we don't have a lot of really good, solid research when it comes to timelines, etc., because it is so poorly funded. So we don't have any. I mean, there's a lot of clinical input around those kinds of timelines, but it's so dependent on resources, right? A lot of that reflects maybe somebody who can't access the resources which would help them to recover in a shorter timeline, because I work on treatment teams and we'll see somebody right from day one through to the point where they consider themselves recovered. And it's just a whole bunch of different timelines. But a lot of that comes down to if we could actually effectively resource people. For some people, yes, it would always take that amount of time. But for a lot of people, it doesn't have to take that long, which is great, because people who have been ill for a long time, it doesn't even take half the time that it took, in terms of the duration of their illness to get out of it, right? So, we need a little bit more consensus, I think, in terms of some averages. But that's the problem is, it's such an individual experience for everyone. Every part of the experience is so varied. Not a lot of it is very cookie cutter.
Yeah. My sort of main experience, I mean, I work with clients that have struggled with eating disorders or still have some form of that. Obviously, like there's an intersection with like my work around sex coaching and education and like body image and confidence in the bedroom and self-worth and things like that. So a lot of people that come with challenges with relating and intimacy do also have body issues and then disordered eating and stuff coming into that. But I probably, as someone who hasn't battled with an eating disorder, I mean, I think I had like an overeating disorder, like very disordered eating in terms of like binging back in the day, but never sort of fully, controlled me to the degree that I know it can. But one of my oldest friends from high school has struggled with anorexia for nearly 20 years, nearly 20 years now. And it just can feel so never ending and such an uphill slog to recovery with like, backslides, and it's not a linear journey. And it's been incredibly informative, fascinating. I've learned so much, like very eye-opening to like speak to them about it over the years, and also just completely heartbreaking. And there's been periods of time where I basically was like grieving this friend and thinking, okay, it's probably not long now until they this illness gets the better of them. And I remember when they were in the eating disorder clinic in Richmond, and I'd go visit every day, and it just felt woefully under resourced. Like it didn't feel like that was the right place for them to be, or that it was really even very helpful. And maybe it was helpful for like a really acute stage, when you pretty much have to be force fed so that you don't die. But then that was one stage of recovery. And then the sort of next stage that they wouldn't have been able to get to at that point of being that sick, that unwell, was like a whole different approach to recovery, which was like, cool, now we're going to eat like no meal plans, no nutritionist, none of that. We're just going to eat every single thing we feel like whenever we feel like it and refeed for as long as it takes. And that's like a whole different approach to recovery that had to come at a different time in that sort of recovery timeline. And I'm just like wondering, like, and I remember them sort of talking about like, oh, wow, like everything I've tried up to now, like 8 years of fucking therapy with specialists and being in the eating disorder clinic on and off for years, that was all bullshit and it didn't really help. And now this is the approach. But then there's some relapse, and it's just like, wow, like obviously it's not a cookie cutter one size fits all because it's so varied how it presents. And I just found like the main thing that I notice is like it's deeply, deeply insidious and sneaky and creative in the ways that it can get into your brain and warp the way that you think and adapt. So each new phase of recovery, where there'd be these huge progress milestones, there'd be other ways that it would sneak in and still be creating disordered thinking or behaviors. Like that wasn't really a question, but like, do you have anything to say around that?
I think that what we're starting to see is, especially as we move away increasingly, but not terribly quickly, from this whole sense of, there's one way and, there's this cookie cutter or this process we can put people through, and getting closer towards individualized care. We have the philosophy that you can be recovered. And in order to do that, you have to treat the whole person. So a lot of what you see in those settings you're describing is focused on behavioral change, focused on, refeeding. It's very weight focused. It's very medicalized. It's a mental illness which is really being looked at through the lens of all the physical metrics of progress, right?
Yeah.
And that, they're on meal plans. And don't get me wrong, meal plans are really important. They create a safety net. We've got people who have no hunger cues. They have no craving cues. They have no satiation and fullness cues. So if we say, just go and eat what you feel like eating, they have no hunger cues. They're not going to eat anything. So those kinds of environments where there's structure, and as you say, it's a very specific part of treatment, which is to keep people safe and stable, but that's not the end of the process. That is just the beginning. It is the first domino. When I have clients who have to go into those environments, I always say to them, we need to think of this as a booster. This is not, you go into that environment, even the best residentials, which are the holistic healing kind of environments where it's medical and it's psychological. You have a dietitian, talking about spaces like Wanda Nerida up in Queensland, our one and only residential facility. You don't walk into that environment and walk out 3 months later and you're fully recovered. That is just not going to happen. You don't walk into a hospital, into inpatient, and walk out fully recovered, because you have to recover in your life. You have to recover with connection. You have to recover and learn how to manage and regulate through life anxieties. You have to recover and be able to show up to a dinner and the restaurant gets changed on you last minute, and that's no problem. You have to be able to recover through breakups, through loss, you have to be able to get to the weed system, the root system of the weeds that are feeding what's popping out on top. What's popping out on top are the behaviors, the fear of food, the fear of weight, the fear of body changes. What we find when we dig into those initial fears, which all sound really eating disorder specific on top, when you help people challenge what's sitting underneath those fears, it's all the same stuff. Fear of the unknown, fear of not belonging, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of things which have happened to them before, which are traumatic, trying to prevent those from happening again. So unless we get down into that root system, you can chop off all the behavioral weeds on top, and you can weight restore, and you can get through all your fear foods, and you can stop using binging and purging behaviors. But what's inevitably going to happen is life is going to happen. And then what is going to bloom out of that weed system, like that root system of those weeds, unless you yank them all out, examine them, and decide what you're going to put back in, right? So in my view, it all has its place. Those people are in those environments to get them to a place where they're safe enough to be able to connect to the real, practical, cognitive change we are making in an outpatient sense, where we are working through, yes, their fear foods, yes, getting their relationship with movement to be something intuitive and healthy, self-aligned, to get their body image to not be distressing and more of a messenger and something that's, much more ordered, to teach them how to help seek effectively, to have boundaries effectively, to not give away too much of their energy until they're forced to retreat and disappear into something maladaptive like an eating disorder, to teach them how to anchor to meaning and purpose and who they are as a person outside of their body and these rules and this eating disorder identity. We do not have a cohesive treatment system which does that. And all these systems need to talk to each other. Wandi is a good example. For instance, we're on their referral list and they work with eating disorder coaches. So when they have somebody discharging, they say to these people, you need to make sure you have an outpatient team when you leave, because that needs to be the bridge to all of the in your real life work you need to do to solidify your recovery. Because too much of our system is a revolving door for people. And part of that is because we tell them, you're essentially never really going to get better. You're going to be tackling this for the rest of your life. I was told that, and I believed it firmly. And it led to repeated bouts of relapse, because if you tell people they can only go so far on the map, why would they keep walking? And I hear things as a professional out of certain clinics with clients who tell me as they're being discharged, they're told it's probably a good idea to get in touch with us and pop something on the books for 3 to 6 months from now, just in case.
Oh, wow.
So if you're putting that into people's heads and we're trying to get them back out into their lives and go, okay, now this is where the real work is done, let's do it. And in the back of their head, they're going, I'm just going to go back into the revolving door. You're not really setting people up for a lot of success. My view is that we should all, our collective goal is that our job is to put ourselves out of a job, is to get people all the way to the end. And it's like, I just finished up with a client this week who just came to one of our recovery retreats where we take people on these beautiful retreats as they're towards the end of the process as kind of a celebration. And she broke up with me at that retreat, which is exactly what is supposed to happen. And she had anorexia for 30 years, has been in and out of treatment for 20 plus years. And because she had this resourcing that I think is so important, psychiatrist, doctor, dietitian, and me as a coach, she did trauma work. She did all the things which targeted all the things in the root system and considers herself now fully recovered. And when we were talking about it, she said, when I started with you, I kind of wanted to be proved right that this wasn't going to work, because that's what I'd always been told. This is not going to work. I'm going to have this forever. So, I think there's a lot of good that's happening in the space. And I think we're also still letting people down with some really archaic views and approaches that we just need to ditch, because part of it is just so harmful to people, and it's starting right from what we're telling them they're capable of.
Yes. And that's such a feature of so much mental health triage. Is that the word? Like, I feel like there isn't a whole lot of like, right, let's approach this holistically and get them from start to finish and put ourselves out of the job. It's like each portion of the way is like doing their little bit and then handballing the person on and pushing them out. And of course, they're going to continue to relapse and come back to that step when there isn't that bridge to the next step and a whole bunch of scaffolding and support in place. And, of course, then the issue, as with most health stuff, is like resources, money, accessibility. Like, who the
Expensive.
fuck has all of that time and money and access to the really sort of, specific healing modalities that they would need to
Mhm.
have a holistic, you know, healing team at their disposal for years potentially. Like, it's a lot.
Mhm.
And it's not always, I mean, and this is a thing with any mental health or chronic health thing, is like you're literally on the back foot dealing with like a life or death fucking illness, and from that place of like depletion and being under resourced and probably not even having the motivation or the will to fucking live,
Yeah.
you have to then go and seek out the right professionals and be able to make the money to pay for them and all of this stuff. And it's like just so devastating that, yeah, I mean, especially I'm thinking of people who are, in minority groups,
Yes.
underrepresented, disenfranchised folk. Also, like something I've noticed, this is a tangent as well, but people who are, I mean, so I guess there's a lot of talk in like recovery spaces about like, let go of your old body. The aesthetic is just let go of that. Da 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 da. This body you've become attached to, this way of being you've become attached to. Let that go, which is all very well. Then you think about people, when it intersects with like other identity factors, like gender diverse community, like people. So my friend who's non-binary and not just didn't want to be fat,
Mhm.
but didn't want to have boobs,
Yep.
didn't want to have hips, didn't want
Dysphoria.
curves.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah. So then the body dysphoria, the gender dysphoria is like a big part of it. Then, maybe someone who survived a really deep trauma where this has become not just a maladaptive coping mechanism, but like such a massive defense mechanism that becomes their whole sense of safety. And if you take that away, it's like, who am I in the world? If you take that away, my identity crumbles. This thing that has become my main companion and my main safety blanket is
Yeah.
now ripped away from me. Like, I just think like, yeah, sometimes recovery is asking people to live a life that literally feels unlivable,
Mhm.
which then, raises issues of suicidality and all of this. And like, do I even want to recover? Like, is that even possible for me? Um, and then, yeah, you add in the accessibility stuff and it's just like, I don't know, sometimes I feel really, I guess, especially supporting and loving someone who is going through this and watching it and just being like, fuck, like, what, it's huge.
Mhm.
And so that holistic approach is so important, and I'm so saddened that we just don't really have enough understanding and enough support, and like subsidies and stuff like
Yep.
that,
Yep.
for the holistic stuff. It's like, cool, you can probably get a subsidy to go into like a very medicalized eating disorder clinic for a period,
Yes.
but
Well,
like,
it's also so interesting because I was asked to be on a panel with Mark Butler, health minister, a few months ago, talking about sort
wow.
of Labor's new approach, and they've come up with all these new things that they want to do for eating disorders, and we're like, we've told you what we need. It's kind of it's a similar experience in kind of the women's safety domestic violence sphere, where it's like, listen to the people with lived experience who already have the frameworks and just fund the frameworks we already have. Stop reinventing the wheel. We don't need your new centers. We need you to fund the things we already know work. And it was really interesting because he spent quite a bit of time on that call talking about and championing lived experience peer support workers, which is technically the term what I would fall under in terms of the umbrella, and talking about how essential they are to the mental health system, etc. And I asked him, I said, if we're so important and we're always hearing about how crucial and important we are, because we're not leading treatment, but we're a lot of the glue. Like a lot of my job is I provide email support to my clients outside of session, right? So my experience in recovery was going and seeing my wonderful psychologist, and then a full week of no support and just like holding on by my fingernails to any sense of motivation of what I was meant to be doing. And we're holding the line for people. When somebody has a problem with the breakfast goal we've set, they can email me as it's happening. We are troubleshooting as it's happening and going, okay, what is it? What are the variables that are making that difficult? Well, it's this and it's that, and I didn't get enough sleep, and I actually didn't go and buy that thing that I needed for breakfast this morning. So now I've got choice paralysis. I'm like, great. We've got data about what we can change between now and tomorrow, and let's take another run at it tomorrow. Send me an email when you've gone to the shops and you've got the thing, take a photo, send it to me. And then tomorrow morning, let's try this again. Oh, Mia, it went better this morning because, I silenced my phone and I didn't start responding to emails. I just focused on this and I knew I was going to email you. Like, we are holding the line for people.
Yeah.
So I said to Mark Butler, if we're so important, then why aren't we subsidized? Why isn't our work subsidized? It's amazing, don't get me wrong, having been in the advocacy space for so long, to see our first big chunk of funding in 2019 was incredible. To have our Medicare number for the first time, we got a Medicare number for eating disorders in late 2019. And that means 40 subsidized psychologist sessions and 20 subsidized dietetic sessions every year. Fantastic. Thank God Labor hasn't touched that, unlike the 20 psychologist sessions for everybody else, which got cut down to 10. So there is good stuff. But then, as you say, there's all this other cost, which is so, so enormous. And if we have this thing that works, why can't we subsidize it so that people aren't needing the resources for so long? If they get this dedicated help and this help that covers all the different bases, it's not going to necessarily be years and years and years of accessing resources, because we can actually address that person as an individual with all of this individualized care, which covers the medical, the psychiatric, the dietetic, the practical, the goal setting, the day-to-day stuff, the troubleshooting in real time. We do meal support with people. We go clothes shopping with people. When somebody's got to go to their Christmas event it's always an uncle, with their uncle who always says inappropriate things about bodies, I'm there in their back pocket as support. That doesn't have to turn into a relapse, right? So his response was, oh, look, we're so passionate about it. It is something we're working on. It's always something they're working on. And in the meantime, we're taking the hit because, for instance, this week I offered 2 people sliding scale, and I work with people pro bono, right? And this is in the cost of living crisis. It's not like we've got a lot of wiggle room, but I know that I can be of help to people, and the government isn't extending the possibility for them to work with me. So I have to, and my colleagues who I know do the same thing, have to move things around for us financially, because we can see the potential in this person and what it could mean for them. And you just can't say no to that, So yeah, there's so much to do. It's why, as much as, I'm spread fairly thin and I've been at this eating disorder advocacy stuff for 12 years, it's something I just can't turn my back on, because I know that it works and I know what we can do for people across the entire treatment space. And I would love to see the day where it's recognised, what we're saying is recognised, and they're actually implementing what we've been advising for years, which is, sure, have these spaces where people go in to stabilise, but then give them the tools to be able to stay out of this revolving door permanently. Everyone wants to go on about how much, it costs to support people, etc. And it's like, again, if you just listen to people with lived experience, we'd probably have some pretty solid solutions for you.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. We're just sort of burning money and resources on one small kind of type of treatment and
Someone's good
stage of
idea in a government building who's never had an eating disorder or probably spoken to anyone with one. Like, thanks, but no thanks. Just give us what we're asking for.
My God. Oh, I'd love to get into some more. I'd love to dive a bit deeper. First, though, I want to do the segment, Get Pregnant and Die.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die. Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
Right.
Do you have a sex ed anecdote for us before we get stuck back in?
I don't have a sex ed anecdote, but I was really reflecting on this in terms of, especially working in the women's safety space, which talks so much about, sexual safety and consent, etc. Reflecting on that, how how little we were truly taught. And like, I'm 37, so I have no idea if this has changed. I think around the issues of consent, it has hopefully changed. But even things like, pleasure focused education, and how it really took me getting into my 20s and luckily having a group of girlfriends at that time who were in a way that initially made me really uncomfortable. And then I was like, oh my God, no, I love this. You're a feminist, Mia. Like, you can't be uncomfortable on principle, like contribute to the conversation. Talking about pleasure and talking about masturbation and talking about it in this way that was just like we were talking about, the last pair of shoes we bought, and it really just continues to amaze me how it was both. It didn't address safety, and it also didn't address you as an autonomous woman in terms of exploration of your own body, understanding of your own body, and this very puritanical, clinical approach that was taken that was more so about your responsibility in terms of, sexual health and all of this very puritanical, judgmental, loaded kind of language. And just my hope that hopefully at least in the consent department, but certainly in the, the pleasure focused sort of angle in terms of teaching young women about their bodies and teaching them about their agency in particular, because those things absolutely go hand in hand, like consent and your understanding of your divine right to pleasure. It's like they're so synonymous. They run parallel,
Oh, preach. Fuck yeah. Can completely agree and love that. I mean, I think having a group of friends that are at different stages of their journey in terms of acceptance around their body's pleasure, how sort of comfortable or empowered they are around that is a protective factor. Like if you've got friends that are talking about it like it's just another, pair of shoes that they're about to buy, it's like their comfortability is a transmission that helps you kind of get there. And it's so sad and dangerous when people don't have a friendship group that talk about that, and when it's all very hush hush and taboo and stigmatized and no one feels comfortable to broach those topics because that's where the shame hides out in the shadows. And if we're not talking about it, we're not dismantling the layers of shame and misinformation.
Yes.
So yeah, it's really cool that you had a group of girlfriends who provided that for you, and yeah, love that. So there's around last time I sort of checked, around 1 million people in Australia alone with an eating disorder. When you include disordered eating behaviours, as you said, it's not always as sort of clean cut. The number is way higher. And since 2012, there's been a 21% increase in eating disorders in Australia. I think Instagram has a lot to answer for, social media in general. Diet culture may have many of us not even realizing when our eating habits are becoming disordered, and restricting is starting to happen more and more. It's even encouraged and rewarded in some areas. And I'm wondering, whether there's some common myths or misunderstandings about eating disorders that still persist today that you'd like to debunk or to talk about. I think a lot of people probably aren't really even aware. I mean, sometimes it creeps up on you, and before you've even realized you've got a problem, it's like, oh shit. And so, yeah, are there any things that you would love to chat about, or myths that you'd like to debunk, or misinformation? Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the poddy to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be hopefully, inspiring, thought provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational, and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook, and I'll see you in there. And now back to the episode.
So many myths, and it's been really encouraging over 13 years to see some of them start to be debunked or more widely known to be pretty rubbish. And then there's others that permeate and stick around, which are really frustrating. One of them being that eating disorders only or predominantly impact young, white, affluent women. That is not the case. That is absolutely, in terms of what we know from statistics, but also if you're on the ground and you're at the coalface, you know who you hear from and you know the demographics that you hear from and work with, and that is absolutely not the case. In terms of even the numbers of people who we know have eating disorders, they have to be estimates because of this kind of stereotype and stigma. You're therefore going to have people who don't see themselves in the stereotype and are not going to put their hands up for treatment. So when we estimate that it's over 1 million, my feeling is it's likely much, much, much higher because we know, for instance, stats like 1 in 5 anorexia sufferers are men, but it's probably higher than that. We just don't have the best ways to track this stuff, especially because of stereotypes, which basically say if you don't see yourself in this, don't put your hand up. And they're certainly then not going to take the extra step towards treatment. And it's also just deeply misogynistic because that also is tied into another myth and stereotype, which is silly little girls on silly little diets are just so vain and superficial and all they want is to be thin, and that's why it's their fault. If they ended up with this eating disorder, it's their fault because all they cared about was their body and what it looked like, which is not true. As we've already kind of touched on, everybody has their own perfect storm. And it's always multifaceted. One of those things is genetics. We found the first genetic marker for eating disorders in the last few years, and those genetic studies are continuing to show markers for, the first marker was for anorexia. I think they're doing a study around binge eating disorder at the moment, looking for a similar kind of genetic marker. And we know that people very often report trauma. I would say in more cases than not, my clients have some element of trauma in their contributors. These are biopsychosocial illnesses, right? So partly they're genetic, they're biological, they're partly psychological, and they're partly, social. We live in a world that tells us in order for you to not just be celebrated, but to be safe and belong, your body needs to present in a certain way, right? We're not making this stuff up. So yes, it is a myth that we're doing these things for superficial reasons or vain reasons, but let's just even lean into the myth for a second and say that is true. That is the sole reason why somebody develops an eating disorder. Who could blame them? Women are constantly told the way to keep yourself safe is to belong, and the way you belong is to show up in the world in a certain body. And if you don't, you are going to be punished with ridicule and rejection and judgment, and you are going to be exiled. You don't belong, and you don't deserve fair and humane treatment in some instances, right? So even if that were the case, we're still blaming young women for, and not just young women, but people of all identities, all genders, all gender identities, all backgrounds, all ages. We're all vulnerable to these belief systems. It just tends to be targeted at some more than others. Who could blame us for adopting that belief system and having it be part of the fuel which is upholding the eating disorder? Is it necessarily a really key cause? I don't believe so, but it's a great lieutenant for the eating disorder. It upholds everything. Those two are particularly concerning because they've been around forever, and when we see Butterfly Foundation doing these surveys of people's general beliefs about eating disorders, they're two that continue to show up. And the just eat a burger myth is also incredibly frustrating. The idea of, it's not, oh, well, love, just eat a burger. I mean, what's the problem? Again, reducing something incredibly complex down to this is just about food. This is just about body. It isn't. They are tiny pieces of an enormous process somebody has to go through that has a hell of a lot more to do with identity and safety and all the key parts of being a person that goes so far beyond body, food. They're boxes we tick. The deeper work is where we're spending most of our time with people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there's so many cultural pressures that, aside from the really sort of obvious ones, beauty standards, diet culture, wellness culture, social media, that, fuel disordered eating, and it can be so sneaky, and there can be like, multiple catalysts, and like you said, it can be the perfect storm, and maybe it's not even about what they look like, it's about controlling one fucking thing in their life. It's about safety and feeling as though you can control something. It's about perfectionism. It's about different things for different people, and a lot of these, catalysts or reasons or contributing factors aren't super obvious, and wouldn't be people's first thought. I think it's a very misunderstood illness. And that sort of really dismissive attitude around, oh, it's like a white, thin woman's, like young woman's illness. It's very harmful, that stereotype. And then that erases, so many different identities and reasons for, developing this coping mechanism. And you sort of said, just fucking eat a burger, which is just such a classic, like, it's a bit of a drink a cup of concrete and harden up type of throwaway comment. What are some other really unhelpful things that people often say to those who are battling with disordered eating?
There's a variety of them, and I to an extent I understand them, because when you have an eating disorder, it's kind of like, there's the internal experience of something and then it's how it presents. It's kind of like when somebody has depression, they can be incredibly irritable, right? They can be incredibly reactive. They can, I have CPTSD, which I was lucky to be treated for a few years ago. And my worst symptoms were things like hypervigilance. I was incredibly irritable. I was incredibly hard to interact with because I was so reactive and I was so on edge and I was so ready for disaster to strike, and my anxiety was so high. And so people will have a reading of people with eating disorders that they are self-involved or they're selfish or, they're really difficult to deal with. And it's a lot of the same mechanisms that we see with people who are walking around with these trauma symptoms as well, which is these are really terrified, vulnerable people, and they are constantly hypervigilant. They are constantly on guard. And they're also very often, and this is true in all kinds of bodies, when I say things like, people who aren't eating enough, very often, people just see that as us talking about one kind of body. You can be undernourished and not eating enough in all kinds of bodies and experience these kinds of symptoms. Where if you're not fueling your brain properly, you're not going to be able to operate the way that you usually would. You're not going to be able to connect and communicate and be present and show up the way that you usually would. I remember that sense of, going to a restaurant with friends and feeling like I had eyes in the back of my head because I was just constantly monitoring everyone and everything around me to make sure, like, am I okay in this space? Am I showing up in a way that's acceptable in this space? I was just so hyper vigilant and hyper aware of how I was being perceived and received, because again, that was a safety thing. That was, am I okay in this space? Am I safe with these people? And as you touched on, like there's elements of traumatic experiences people have had. I, know across the swathe of my clients and former clients, things like sexual violence and sexual assault show up in a lot of our histories. And it makes sense then why the body feels like it is something which needs to be controlled or altered, or, you know, we can disappear into numbing behaviors like binging and purging. And we can sort of express our boundaries and our needs through our body and our behaviors because we don't feel like we can express it to people who have told us essentially they can't help us, or, you know, they don't care, or, you know, they don't know how to support us. An eating disorder and the body and these behaviors become a little bit of a spokesperson, right, in ways that we don't feel safe to express. So when people read our behavior or how we react or respond or don't show up to friendship or don't show up to connection in a way that we would probably like to, there's a lot of judgment made. There's a really, really well-known YouTuber who has quite evidently been really unwell for a long time. I don't know if you've heard of her, Eugenia Cooney. And if you look up the videos made about Eugenia, she has been called evil. She's been called a narcissist, a predator. She's got an enormous platform. And I've always found the case study of Eugenia Cooney really interesting because people had sympathy for her for X amount of time. And then when she didn't get better or didn't show up in the way that people wanted her to and recover the way that they wanted her to, it very quickly turned into she's a terrible person who's making all of these intentional choices. And I see that showing up in a real world sense very often, which is, you know, this person is very quickly blamed for their eating disorder as if it's a series of intentional choices they're making, which I think, again, goes back to the fact that we believe that this is something which predominantly only affects young white women. And the belief that young white women are superficial and silly and self-involved. And there's just a lot of shame and judgment that we throw at people, not realizing that a lot of how they're presenting is an expression of their suffering. It's not actually an expression of who they are.
Yeah, so beautifully said. Something that I mean, I learned so much through my friend having an eating disorder, and they've been really generous with, you know, their sharing about the ins and outs and the nuances and the different triggers and things like this. And, you know, a couple that spring to mind that I guess probably, you know, your average person wouldn't realize could be harmful or unhelpful or a trigger is, you know, when you do start putting on a bit of weight and someone might use a word that isn't, you know, it's a positive word, but, you know, saying, oh, you look healthy, to someone with an eating disorder who's conscious that they've been putting on weight, that is just like, holy fucking shit, I'm getting fat. Like, you know, even just commenting on appearance at all is kind of a no-go area because it's a minefield and you could say the wrong thing so easily without intending to. You know, anything, any sort of thing that indicates, you know, getting your period back as well, like huge time for relapse because it's an indication that, you know, you've obviously put on enough weight and you're nourished enough now from eating enough that your body's starting to kick into gear and do these functions. And so I think a lot of people that are really well-meaning, like families of people or loved ones of people with an eating disorder, don't realize how delicate and sensitive that person is, and that every single word that they say can be interpreted through the disordered lens. I almost think of it as there's like a whole, and I haven't got the personal experience of this, but you know, it can become pretty psychotic, like when you're that malnourished, that you can develop like psychosis and different voices and things like this. And it almost seems like the way that I look at it is like the disordered thinking is its own entity that is insidiously living inside you and trying to call the shots and make decisions and swerve you onto a path that serves its purpose and trying to protect you in its own sort of maladaptive way. And it's the one listening out for words or phrases that it can use to weaponize against you and try to force a relapse. Is there anything that would be helpful for family members or loved ones to kind of know, maybe, you know, looking back, what do you wish people had like said or done or not said during your tough moments and recovery?
Well, just on that, I think one of the most helpful things we can teach people kind of links back to something you just said about kind of the voices, right? Which is, very often we hear it being externalized, like there's you and there's your eating disorder, which can be really damaging for people when, especially when they're showing up to treatment and they're saying things like, they're expressing their needs or they're expressing what's going on, and they'll be told like, that's your eating disorder. Just like, don't listen to it. That's your eating disorder. And they're like, it's actually not. It's actually coming from me. And the way that we work with this stuff is this concept called the healthy self and the eating disorder self, which was game changing for me. Absolutely game changing. It comes from Carolyn Costin.
Parts work.
8 Keys philosophy. So Carolyn trained me. She set up the Carolyn Costin Institute, who trains coaches, but she started in lived experience. She had an eating disorder. She became a therapist, she was one of the first eating disorder therapists. And then she opened Montenegro, which was one of the first residentials in America. There's about 7 or 8 of them now. And her model is the one that we use for Wandanerida, which is the partially government funded, partially Butterfly Foundation funded residential facility up in Queensland. And so what she talks about is these 2 selves. They're not personalities, they're both you. But the best way to demonstrate it is, I always, start this off with clients when we're doing consultations, when I'm talking about how this works, that there is an external eating disorder. You are not the illness. We are not eating disorders. There is an illness which latches onto kind of this vulnerable patch we're all walking around with, if we have the eating disorder vulnerability patch, right? Which is some of the things we've talked about. First of all, genetics, temperament, personality type, past experiences, trauma. These things sort of formulate this patch, which the eating disorder kind of latches onto. And what it starts to do over time is it starts to come up with its own values, its own beliefs, its own rules, its own approaches, which are completely separate to what we call the healthy self, which is sort of this self you're born as, right? You're not born with an eating disorder. And the best way to demonstrate this to people when they're like, Mia, there is no healthy self in here. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I am full eating disorder self, is to ask them, if you had a close friend of yours, a loved one, show up at your door and say, I've had the worst 6 months of my life, Mia. I have totally low mood. My anxiety's through the roof. My body image is in the bin. Everything's going wrong. I'm just not coping. Would you hand that person your list of eating disorder behaviours to cope? And would you talk to them the way your eating disorder talks to you? And immediately, over 8.5 years, every single person has immediately said no. Of course not. Why wouldn't you do that? You believe sometimes that these things are solutions for you, that they regulate you, they make you feel better, they give you something to work towards, they give you a sense of purpose and identity, they shut down your anxiety and make your low mood numb. So why wouldn't it work for this person? Because it wouldn't be a solution, because the harms are so much more than the actual help. There you go. Exactly. How do 2 different answers to the same question belong in the same brain? And you believe them fully, equally, right? But you believe this for 7 billion other people and you believe this for yourself. So what we're doing in some of the fundamental work I do with people is a skill called dialoguing, where it's not me telling them, it is them telling them. They already have that healthy self in there in terms of what they believe for others, how they would take care of others, and how they do that for themselves. So eating disorders make a lot of claims. They make claims about health, which I love when they make claims about health, because with one of the highest mortality rates, we can immediately debunk that. As I say to clients, if you had to have surgery, would you have a surgeon who killed 20% of their patients and maimed the remaining 80%? And they're like, no. And I'm like, that's what you're doing when your eating disorders running your health. That's the statistical issue. And they're like, oh God, yeah, I don't know what to say. And that's just one example of what we would say back to eating disorder, right? It would say, if you recover, you're not going to be healthy, and, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And just responding with, you kill 20% of people who have you, you harm and destroy the lives of the remaining 80%. If you were a surgeon or a doctor, I wouldn't go to you. I say to them, if you found out I did that to clients, would you show up next week? No. Okay. And I'm not even running the whole system of your mental health and physical health and relationships and purpose and, your relationship with yourself, most importantly. And we're kind of just letting it continue to run those things when we can intervene and change that. So going back and forth and dismantling its arguments and dismantling its beliefs and just using some of these mindset shifts we teach people. A lot of what I'm doing is just taking people around the corner of their thought and looking at it from a different angle and going, oh, this isn't even an actual structure. This is like a bit of cardboard that just needs to be tipped over, right? Like, you see those sets where
Yep.
you see like the apartment buildings and they look really realistic, and then you walk around and you're like, oh my God, there's nothing back here. It's not a building. It's just a piece of wood with a building painted on it. That's a lot of the, how solid an eating disorder actually is when you examine it. It's just flimsy. It's nothing. It can't support you really. And so when you get them to do that, what starts to happen is the eating disorder quietens down. That then gives them the space to take the action we're getting them to do that week, the goal that we're setting, because a lot of what prevents people from taking action is eating disorder starts barking at them. They get so overwhelmed and so anxious. They go, okay, I'll do whatever you want me to do. We teach them these skills which just put a bit of space between them and the first thought and the first urge, get them to dismantle those arguments like they're kind of having a debate. And then they get a choice back because they're looking at the actual facts on the table versus just the feelings. Feelings are valid. We want to hold space for the feelings. We don't necessarily want to be led and informed by them. We want to be led and informed by the facts. And the more we move in the direction of the facts and the truth that our healthy self presents, the more the feelings and the thoughts start to change. That's why we can help people neurally rewire. We're getting them to take action, but we're getting them to challenge with these skills the fundamental beliefs that are upholding the eating disorder until we're going, oh, I don't buy it anymore. Oh, no, my eating disorder is saying something and I don't believe it anymore. What do I do now? I remember when that first happened for me, I went to use a behaviour early on in recovery, and having used some of these skills, I went, oh, no, it's not going to work. It's not going to make me feel better. And that felt terrible because I was like, well, I know too much. I can't go back. I can't live in the world of denial anymore where I actually thought this made me feel better and made me feel good. So, yeah, recovery it requires a lot of this deeply practical work where we're helping people to dismantle and unpack and disprove a lot of the things they've really firmly believed. So in terms of, some of the things that I wish I'd had, that's certainly one of them, is not so much demonizing and externalizing my eating disorder, but seeing it as the most vulnerable part of me and something that I actually had to integrate back into my whole self and take care of, because a lot of the advice I was getting was it's this evil thing that you just need to shut down and not listen to, when actually it was trying to tell me a lot. It was trying to tell me about my pain. It was trying to tell me about my vulnerabilities. It was trying to tell me about what I needed to soothe and regulate. So eventually finding this framework was life-changing. As far as like support from other people outside of like some of that advice, similar to something you just said, one of my first instincts in recovery, and I don't know where I got it from, was to ask my friends and family to never comment on my food and never comment on my body unless something was happening on a list of like pre-agreed red flags. Like, unless these things are happening, do not comment on it. Because as you say, this eating disorder self part of us, this really vulnerable, hypervigilant part of us that's always scanning for, am I okay? Am I safe? Am I okay? Is going to hear totally innocuous things, sometimes genuinely encouraging, loving things, and it is going to snatch an insult out of the jaws of a compliment, right? So it was just so nice to know I didn't have to scan, I didn't have to analyze, because it wasn't coming. I told them, don't tell me a compliment about how I look. Don't tell me anything about or ask me anything about food or comment on what I'm eating. I just knew the comments weren't coming. So I can have this kind of space to explore, how does it feel to not go looking for that affirmation and validation from the body perspective? And how can it feel to have a relationship with food where I'm not perceiving that everybody is watching me and surveilling me and judging me? And it was a game changer. And it's what I recommend for clients now, especially with partners, which is really hard because partners are like, but I want to compliment them. I want to tell them that I'm like, I get it. They're not necessarily picking up what you're putting down. And if we give them a period of rest from that, they'll be able to connect to it more long-term from their healthy self. But until we can confidently say that that's the part that's more so dominant, then these things that are meant to be lovely can be a little bit of a hindrance. So long answer, but yeah, from a treatment perspective and also from sort of that loved one perspective, I think that there's some attitude changes and just experiments we can run which kind of feel counterintuitive, right? Like we want to be supportive, we want to compliment. It's like I always challenge people, yes, you can still compliment them, but challenge yourself to find something which is not appearance based, like saying to partners, tell her or him things you love about them, but be creative, like tell them things you actually value about them. Because if you had to ask your loved ones, can you tell me the 5 things you appreciate about me most? Guarantee what you look like is not going to be on that list, but it tends to be the first thing we all say to each other. Oh my God, you look amazing. Oh, have you lost weight? Oh, your hair color. Like we don't actually care about these things, but we're all reinforcing to each other how important it is, and very often by our nearest and dearest.
Yes. Oh my God. I love that you brought this in because it's such a thing. And, when I talk to people about um dating, especially in the early stages of dating and also parenting, I'm
Mhm.
like, cool, let's look at how we compliment people because this is literally like conditioning and grooming people to feel like their self-worth is tied up in their appearance. And it's also something that they can't, they're kind of born with how they look and they can't control it. And if they're controlling it, it's probably in an unhealthy or disordered way. And so, like,
Right.
why are we constantly commenting on and rewarding appearance changes or whatever? And so, yeah, really big advocate of like non-aesthetic compliments. They
Mhm.
fucking mean so much more anyway.
Totally. That's what I
And
wanna hear.
yeah,
I wanna hear that my friends are, like,
exactly.
noticing, like, I don't want them to notice my hair. I want them to be like, "That thing that you put up on Instagram, like, that new project you're working on, it looks amazing. Tell me about it."
Yeah.
Like, my best friend and I, we have an upcoming it's totally tongue in cheek. We call it Business Babes with a Z on the end. Like, that really
Oh God.
that really ick girl boss pink feminism
Yeah,
period
yeah.
of
You should put a
like
hashtag in there just for good
yes.
measure.
Totally, because like she's an artist. In fact, I can show you. She does these. She's has this thing called Josie Doodles. These little blue guys that she
Oh,
does.
cute.
And she's getting back into that because her daughter is now at school, and obviously I have projects that I work on, and that's the stuff we talk about and compliment each other on and hype each other up with,
Yeah.
um, and it really takes a little bit of retraining. It is such a
Yeah.
default. It was something I really intentionally had to work on,
Yeah.
was redirecting my default towards things where I was like, I have to take this level of interest because I have to find something to say.
Mm.
And I really want this person to know what I actually value about them. And yeah, it's like we're all gaslighting each other. We all know that we don't actually value this about each other, but yeah, we're all reinforcing the notion that it's so important.
Mhm.
Same best friend, her daughter Nina she's my niece. She's 6 now, and even ever since Jose was pregnant, we were like, so she was like, okay, so with your background and your expertise, like how do we balance, we want to affirm her, but we don't want how she looks to be important. Like how, and I was like, Jose, we'll just come up with a long running sentence that we say to her every time we compliment her. So we still do it to this day. We're like, Neens, you're so brave and smart and funny and kind and sweet and gorgeous and lovely. And we just like bury it in there where
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
it's not the main feature, but it's just tucked in there. And yeah, it was something that we were talking about even when Jose was pregnant, because as you say, it's not just in our friendships, it's in how we parent as well, and particularly with young girls, right? Like we don't
Yes.
really talk about the appearance of young boys, but little girls are getting that message from a really young age. It always breaks my heart when I see mostly TikToks, etc., of little girls who are clearly already so preoccupied with
Yep.
appearance and how they're
Yeah.
supposed to look and comments they're receiving. And I'm like, God, we just don't give girls a hope in hell, do
Oh
we?
my God.
We just
No,
don't give them a
exactly.
chance.
I know. It's actually so fucked. I live with a 4-year-old, one of my besties, who's a single mom. I live with
Oh, I
her and her
love
daughter.
that you live together. That's my
Yeah.
dream. I love Josie's partner, don't get me wrong, but I'm like, let's all move in together, all of us.
It's so cute and it's so lovely to be child adjacent. And I used to work in childcare, so I kind of nerd out a little bit on like childcare, parenting, early learning,
Mhm,
and stuff.
mhm.
And then obviously this sort of other part of my wheelhouse around sex positivity, body positivity, feminism, and stuff. So it's like, we're kind of semi co-parenting this little girl, and
Love
we do
it.
the exact same thing with the compliments. Like we'll bury the appearance based thing or the thing about her outfit in amongst other, you know, compliments about her heart and her
Yeah,
bravery and her funniness and,
friend
all
you.
of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so important. It's really, yeah, we don't stand a chance when we are just it's such low-hanging fruit, to give a compliment based on an appearance or an outfit or hair or something. Plus the added layer of the fact that like women in particular have really learnt to bond through self-deprecating and, "Oh, I look so fat today. Oh, no, you don't." Like we can't
Even
even.
dieting. Dieting
Yeah.
is like a group activity. My mum,
Oh,
who I have to say, like, she was quite a good role model for body image. She was always pretty confident in her body and, has always been like one of those women who's like, oh, I just loved it as I got older. My 40s was just like the peak of existence. I loved it. And then she was like, no, it was 50s. So I've always had a really good role model in that sense. I
wow.
think it's why when you know, even with girlfriends of mine now getting into our late 30s, who once we hit 30, I had a few girlfriends who kind of hit a bit of a wall of panic in terms of aging. And I was like, I just don't feel that, which again speaks to the importance of those role models where it was like, it was just never modeled to me that it was anything but a
Yeah.
great thing. So I'm like, I can't wait to level up to the next decade. Let's see what comes with that. Can't wait to check it out. But yeah, it's so important that it's starting from an early age and that they have various role models as well, right? Like I remember growing up and my mum's friends I was sort of watching them closely as well and the conversations they were having. And I remember mum dieting with her friends, not because it was important to her to change her body. It was because they were doing it. It was just like a group activity and a sense of
Yeah,
belonging.
wow.
So I always thought that was such an interesting example because it had nothing to do with actually altering her body. It was because she didn't want to be left out of what everyone else
Totally.
was doing, which again is
Totally.
just another layer of so much of this stuff goes back to belonging.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I used to, I've always been quite athletic and quite slim, just genetically, metabolism-wise. I've always loved food, and I eat more than anyone I know, right? Like, I've often got comments from female friends about like, "Oh god, I can't believe you can eat so much. I would never be able to eat that much. Like,
Mhm.
I'm so jealous of you. Like, god, I'd put on so much weight." And things like that. Like if I were more predisposed or vulnerable to an eating disorder, even just comments like that would probably contribute. And I just had this memory come through that I'd actually forgotten about. But my friend who, was battling an eating disorder is, battling when they were in the clinic and we were in our early 20s. I kept a really detailed food journal for them
Mm. Mm.
just to be like, "Hey," and, I asked, like, "Is this helpful?" Like, and they were like, "Oh my god, fuck yeah." Like, just being able to see what a quote unquote normal person eats day to day and
Yeah.
also see that you are the size that you are and your weight doesn't fluctuate and you manage to eat this. I think it was really eye opening. And for months, I kept like a detailed food journal and I would just like handwrite it all in a notebook and then give it to them. And
Mm.
yeah, that's just a crazy little memory that I just had.
Mm.
Um, what are some like, I guess, because, there's the obvious signs that I suppose we're all familiar with around restricting or purging or
Mm.
whatever. What are some like kind of often missed signs or indications that someone has possibly got some disordered eating habits or behaviors or thinking going on that fly under the radar because diet culture is so, common, because we are trained to be so self deprecating and,
Mm.
um, disciplined in ways? Like, are there things that we can be looking out for in, say, our children or our friends or our family members that could be signs of like early disordered behaviours kind of coming in? Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab. And the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster. And it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify or, even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you remember, just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi.
Totally. I think there's two that kind of go hand in hand, which I think are quite common and get missed. One is people who kind of jump from one kind of, not even diet, but one kind of eating to another. You know, that person who's like, they're doing keto and then they're eating really clean and then they're, they're doing intermittent fasting and then they're doing that and it's always something new and fairly short-lived. Like they say that this is the thing that's like, it's a lifestyle, and it's like, well, if it's a lifestyle, why are we only doing it for 3 months?
Yeah.
That sounds more like a program than a lifestyle, let's be honest. So those kinds of, because that's indicating a bit of like a hyper focus and a bit of fixation on how we're eating, which when you've been in an eating disorder, and look, we are like canaries in the coal mine, right? When people have eating disorders, we are having an extreme experience of things that happen in diet culture. They're not separate. They're just spectrums, right? We are down the end of an extreme that is more defined by an illness, but there are features of what we do in our eating disorder that show up on the very socially acceptable like diet culture scale, right? It's just the things that we do. There's more overt behaviors, which we would all recognize as, that is just overtly disordered. Things like purging, right? But even when we try to call things like restriction and overt eating disorder behavior, I'm like, restriction is dieting. Are you kidding me? Like, then everyone who diets has an eating disorder, and we certainly know that's not the case. But it can be quite disordered. So, yeah, I think people who jump sort of eating modalities, and I would put that hand in hand with experts in nutrition without any qualifications. Those people who they've always got the bit of info, the tidbit, this about macro.
Biohacker culture, orthorexia. I was fucking there. I was totally there for a period. And I was like, hang on a second, this is feeling a little bit on the edge of disordered, but, because I got way too obsessed with like, eating healthily and doing the different things and the keto and the this and the that, because I had health issues and gut health stuff. So I was trying to solve that, but then it became this obsession with the way I was eating. And I was like, oh, this is becoming a bit orthorexia sort of and I just ditched it all. But yeah, exactly. It's like those like pseudo nutritionists, health nerds.
Yeah. And I was one of them. Like, I am not a science minded person at all. Dropped science and maths in high school as soon as I could. But this is so clear, like where I was towards the end of my eating disorder, because towards the end of my eating disorder, I went back to university to do dietetics.
Oh, wow.
And I hated it. It was so boring. But of course, my brain was like, you want to know the forensic detail of food? Do you know what you could do? You could go get a nutrition in dietetics. Let's go and do that. That sounds like a great idea. Even though science and maths are miserable for you, this makes sense. And I would soak up information, either genuine or ridiculous. Like, obviously magazines are a dying breed, but do you remember how in all the magazines they would have like the supermodels, what I eat in a day, or this celebrity, what I eat in a day, and it's all garbage. Like, it's all made up. those models, so many of them have come out since and been like, I had a full-blown eating disorder and I definitely wasn't eating. And there was always salmon. They always had salmon as one of the meals, always. It always had boiled or, baked salmon in there. And my brain would soak that stuff up, like just these ridiculously even structured kind of pieces of information. I remember there being a magazine article about using stationery on your desk for portion control. Like if you ate X amount of this thing that covered a Post-it, it was X amount of calories. And I was like, that's genius. Yep, I'm gonna pop that in the back of my head. That's really helpful. And so I would just collect all this stuff. And then when people would ask me, like, how are you so healthy and how do you get your body to blah, 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 I would just lie. I would give out all of this garbage nutrition information that I'd soaked up as if I was this really superior being, and that I had just like had it all figured out. I was probably the most unhealthy person in most rooms, right? So I think that performance sometimes of health, from that nutrition expert kind of position can be a real red flag, because it's like, what are we trying to conceal under there? What are we trying? It's a bit of a magic trick. Look at how much I know and look at all this stuff that I espouse, but that's probably not a lot of what's happening behind the scenes. So yeah, I think that those two, real focus and hyperfixation on how we eat, and also, that performance of health.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't know if this is obvious to everyone, but it wasn't to me years ago. But something that's worth mentioning is like, you don't have to be like obviously skeletally skinny to have an eating disorder. You can be in all sorts of bodies. You can look as though no one would suspect that you have an eating disorder. I think that's a bit of a myth that's quite damaging as well, and that means people probably don't pick up on the behaviours that maybe in a really skinny body they would make assumptions about and associate with an eating disorder. If it's not coming from a person in a super, super, super obviously skinny, unwell body, people kind of just pass it off, as something else.
I think one stat we do have, which is fairly official, is I think it's something like less than 4% of people with eating disorders are visibly underweight. And yet it's, if you said, what does somebody with an eating disorder look like, or you presented people with 3 photos and one of them was an emaciated individual, that would be the one that people would assume would represent the majority of people with eating disorders. And it's just absolutely not true. And it again upholds the idea that these are physical illnesses and that's where the majority of the suffering comes from. It isn't. It's why in my business Beyond Body, when we talk to people, I never ask people for their diagnosis or non-diagnosis ever, in part because when someone does have one of the diagnoses that are more focused on, I'll say, sometimes that can wrap up in their identity as well. And it can be a real challenge for them to have someone be like, I'm not looking at you through that lens. I want to know about the details and the particulars of your experience, not the label for it. And they're like, but the label's really important. And I'm like, well, not in this space. It's not going to be, not for the next hour. But whenever we talk to people and we get a sense of their behavioral profile and what they're dealing with, regardless of diagnosis or non-diagnosis, body, background, gender, whatever it is, the experiences of suffering are all pretty uniform. Like there is a through line, and we see it in the events we run when we bring people together who have had all different kinds of experiences. One of the most amazing parts about it is that there doesn't need to be this initial explanation of what this experience is like. They all just immediately get it and understand it and connect to it. And no one's sitting there going, well, who had anorexia and who had bulimia and who had, you'll understand what I'm talking about, regardless of their background, which they don't know. They don't share that with each other, what their diagnosis or non-diagnosis was. There is just this through line of understanding that we have with each other. So I wish we came at this stuff more so through that angle of the things that people share is probably what we should be focusing on, because doesn't that mean that's probably the thing that's mostly defining this experience, not the body that it presents in?
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Do you want to give me a TMI story for that segment, and then we'll kind of like tie a bow on the episode with another question or two?
TMI, we love it. Said TMI, we love it.
Sure. I might talk about one that's more like a shared shame
Yeah,
sort of thing
great.
that I know people don't talk about. Probably my TMI is something I actually shared fairly early on my channel. I knew that a huge part of what was upholding my eating disorder was this shame element. And a lot of the shame comes from a bit of what we've talked about, that conflict between healthy self and eating disorder self, that your eating disorder self even has a totally different set of values to your healthy self and will get you to behave in ways sometimes which just create this awful tension within. And one of mine was that I used to steal food. I used to steal food from my housemates. If I was like away for a weekend with people, I just could not stop myself from stealing food that I knew was not mine. And even at the risk of getting found out, even things like, and I hear this from clients all the time, these behaviors that they think are so specific to them. And I'm like, it's a symptom. Trust me, I've heard it thousands of times and I did it myself. That's the beauty of the work we do, is we can be like, not only do I know this is a symptom, I probably did it. So don't be embarrassed, because then I'd have to be embarrassed. And do you want me to feel embarrassed? No. So we're just going to talk about it. Things like, there'd be a birthday cake and going and like shaving a layer off the cake and then shaving, or like lasagna. That was a big one for me with lasagna. Anything that could be shaved, like
Yes.
razor thin little ribbons of food, versus just going like, go and have a piece of it, because you end up basically eating almost the whole thing because of this mentality of, every sliver is another bit of shame that builds on the next bit of shame, and the only thing you can do to quell that is have more and more and more. It's a snake eating its own tail. It's shame being resolved by more shame. But I would actually steal items of my housemates' food. And I knew that they would find out because there was only two of us in the apartment. Like, what? Who did I think? Who did I think they were going to think it was? Like, I had a cat. I mean, she doesn't have opposable thumbs, so she wasn't opening up the fridge. And so I knew inevitably there would be the text message or the conversation. And as much as I dreaded the humiliation, and I knew that I would feel humiliated, and that was such a difficult emotion for me from my childhood. Like, I had such a fear of being shamed and humiliated. And also just the shame of doing something which was so incongruent with my value system and the kind of person and friend I wanted to be, that I was taking something that didn't belong to me. I was stealing somebody's property, but I couldn't stop myself because physiologically I was so hungry that biological desire to survive and have food that I had been withholding from myself was so much greater than acting in the opposite direction of my values, which went from being a real source of shame to being a real source of compassion, when I was like, of course you did. Like, this was a literal biological need for food, and you were doing all you could to survive with, this eating disorder stacked against you. But that's one of the symptoms. We talk about all these more obvious symptoms, but boy, have I heard stories like that more than I haven't. And we don't talk about it because, again, just such a level of shame for people.
Yeah. That's a really great example of a TMI and an aspect that doesn't get talked about enough. Like, yeah, and I can relate to parts of that, even though I wouldn't have sort of really thought that I identified with having any sort of eating disorder, but there's definitely elements of that, the shame behaviors. And yeah, like, I mean, there's so much relatable just to the human experience in that. And that's, I guess, really reinforcing this concept that we've been discussing around, it's not just a two-dimensional sort of physical illness or disorder. There's so layered and multifaceted. And yeah, it's as with a lot of mental health challenges. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that'll be really fucking like refreshing for a lot of people to hear. Yeah, okay. So I'm thinking about like just from what I've heard from people who have had a long journey of recovery, relapse, and will feel like they're doing all the right things. They're eating, they're ticking all the boxes, they're in recovery, they're bringing about a healthy sort of restoration of weight. And then that almost sort of sends them into like a relapse because the weight gain registers as a deep sense of like failure or betrayal of the body betraying them betraying the body, really quickly turning into a feeling of unsafety, causing this like nervous system, like whiplash response that's super scary, unsafe, sends all these signals of like, it's not okay, this is wrong. Um, but they might be doing all the right things and seem from the outside recovered. What does recovery actually mean to you? How do we know if we're fully healed? How do you know if you're recovered or in recovery and not at risk of a relapse? Or is it just more of an ongoing kind of relationship with food and body and self? And I guess, yeah, like I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Totally. I didn't know that full recovery was a thing until I was a couple of years in. I really loved my therapist, but she came from the philosophy that you're always in remission, like you're always actively in recovery.
Yeah.
And I was obviously documenting my recovery online and was coming from that approach and was working as hard, 2 years in as I was on day one, and just was so burnt out and exhausted that ironically, it was almost tipping me back into behaviours. Because I was convinced, well, I don't think it was going to tip me back into behaviours. I had a paranoia that I was going to go back into behaviours and felt like I was like holding everything back with all this hard work I was doing. And I made a video about it and people started mentioning Carolyn Costin, and saying like, go and look up her work, go and look up this concept of full recovery. And when I went and read her definition, I was like, oh, actually, that's me. Like, ironically, like, that's me. And what she talks about in this definition, it has nothing to do with BMIs or weights or anything physical. It talks about, when size and shape and weight take a proper perspective in your life, when you are no longer preoccupied with thoughts of food and movement, when your sense of identity and self and worth is, defined by things which are so much more important to you than your body. So it's a really flexible definition, and it's about purpose and meaning and you as a person having evolved and grown and being able to cope in ways that are adaptive and actually regulate you and aren't maladaptive. And that just made sense to me. And so I was like, oh, actually, maybe I need to relax into my confidence that I'm not going to do these things again. And when I did that, I was like, oh, this is what I needed to do. And then giving myself the chance, it's then that plus time where 6 months pass and you're like, oh, I haven't done that in ages. Or no, I haven't even had an urge like to use a behavior or a thought. And yeah, I just kind of like follow my hunger and eat what I feel like eating. And okay, all right, we'll see if this keeps going. And then more time passes and more time passes. And then life really starts to happen. Like when I recovered, life was wonderful for a couple of years. And then my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. He passed away in August of 2019. My sister and I moved to Massachusetts to take care of him when he went into palliative care. I was working the whole time. We took care of him at home. He never went into hospice. Like it was taking care of somebody in every possible facet of what it is to care for someone who's dying of cancer. And he died in a very traumatic way. He died in a lot of pain, which was some of his healthcare was, there were professionals who didn't do what they were supposed to do. We witnessed that. It was terribly traumatic, which is sort of why I went through that trauma work I mentioned earlier. Got back to Australia, down on the south coast where the fires were raging. So spent the next couple of months on high alert with that. I found my grandmother passed away in her home in the May, and then experienced a sexual assault from a friend in December of that year. So it was a shocking 14 months, right? Terrible, terrible. And I was recovered. There was not a single second in all of that where my brain went, let's do something disordered. Never.
Wow.
Never. Let's lose weight. Let's change this. Let's go and buy a bunch of food and binge on. Never once. And I remember emailing Carolyn after I think Gran had died. So we're halfway through sort of the really shitty year and a half. And I said to her, I knew in my bones that I was recovered, but I know it like it's, etched in steel somewhere, inside me. I just know it fundamentally. And she wrote back with a similar story of like this cluster of traumas and experiences she had where she was like, I always knew it too, but it took this to really, with absolute confidence, just stare it into someone's eyes who's looking at you being like, I don't believe in full recovery. And you're like, okay. And you don't have to say anything because you're just like, I know it in a way that I don't even have to push back on any of that stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just a known thing to me. And obviously, like, life has had its ups and downs since then and will continue to, but that was incredible, an awful thing I would never choose to go through, but on this side of things, like, incredibly affirming. So what it means to me is that I just have a very free and natural, intuitive relationship with food. Like yesterday morning, I was waiting for my baked beans to cook and pulled out the pizza from the night before and had a good munch on that, waiting for the baked beans to stop spinning around in the microwave. I can be spontaneous with food. I can, satiate cravings without thinking about it. My relationship with movement is really seasonal. I'm in a season where I'm not doing very much movement at all. I have 2 chronic illnesses. So if I don't feel like it's supportive, I don't do it. If I feel like it is, it is. Movement to me, I stopped running when I went into recovery. I don't think I've been for a run in about 13 years. Movement to me now is more about connecting to the environment I'm in. My dad used to take me bushwalking as a kid. So you'll usually find me like strolling through the bush, listening to a podcast or a song that reminds me of him. In terms of then all the things that support my ability to stay well, I'm not a natural help seeker. I'm an effective help seeker. I'm a skilled help seeker, but it still doesn't come to me naturally. I have stronger boundaries than I used to have. My self-talk is more productive. I still use that dialoguing skill when I'm being hard on myself and I'm being perfectionistic. Can't always choose your first thought, but this skill helps you choose the second one and all the ones that follow. I regulate myself in a way that is adaptive. I'm kind to myself. I treat myself like I would my friend when I've had a terrible day and I'm feeling awful at the end of the day. Again, it's the food is this much. It's the relationship with myself. It's the relationship with other people. It's my sense of purpose and meaning and identity and who I am as a person. But in saying all of that and in touching on Carolyn's definition, that's what recovered is to me. It is not up to me to tell anybody else what recovered is to them or if that's something they should even want. I believe everyone has the right to agency and autonomy in recovery. If you want to get off on this train journey halfway through, you're never, ever going to get questions from me. What I think is more productive is just putting it on the table for people and saying maybe this map is a little bit longer than what we've been told. Because if I hadn't had those wonderful people show up in my comment section to I say to Carolyn, she was always like a pebble being thrown at me. And then she was a rock. And then she was a brick. And then the whole house fell down and was like, go and find Carolyn Costin. If I hadn't been redirected to the possibility of full recovery without the expectation of it, I don't know that I would be here and I don't know that I would be doing what I'm doing.
Wow. Epic. That just feels really hopeful. Yeah, because I've heard a lot of recovery is not possible for everyone. It's not a real thing. Full recovery doesn't exist. You always will be in remission and have this eating disorder, and it's like an addiction, once an addict, always an addict. Yeah. And I feel the crushing, limiting despair that comes with that perspective. And so I've really fucking loved hearing you talk about that. And I think that'll be so expansive and hope-giving for people to hear.
I think just to touch on the addictive thing, I think why when we use words like recovery, there's been too much of a crossing of these streams of, addiction recovery and eating disorder recovery. The key difference is that food is not a Class A drug. Food doesn't have the capacity like drugs and alcohol to chemically alter your brain permanently in this way that, we think it can. Behaviours in their actions can be addictive, but that doesn't mean that they're hardwired in, right? This is the beauty of neuroscience and neural rewiring and neuroplasticity. we can grow new stuff in the brain. And these are the things, the thought challenging along with the action, giving your brain evidence to pay attention to with the goals that we set and the action we take, and then also dismantling the thoughts and fears which uphold it. That is, I always tell people, try to envision when you're doing this stuff where it's like, oh, me, I've got to have this conversation with myself. Oh, I've really got to do this snack challenge. Is this really going to make a difference? Yes, it is. New stuff. Every time you push back, every time you challenge, every time you do the thing your eating disorder doesn't want you to do, something new is growing in the brain. We see it growing. So that's why people can fully recover, is because we're not even amending the stuff that's already in there. We're building new stuff that the more you use it, the more it becomes the first option your brain will reach for. You're only reaching for the eating disorder thing because it's familiar and it's the most dominant thing in there. And what will happen with time is this new way of coping, this new way of operating will become the default, and the old stuff will just drift out of reach. So I think that being able to give people things they can practically hold on to, rather than it feeling like this big nebulous, mysterious, why am I doing this experience, and kind of separating it away from some of that addiction narrative, because they have some crossover, but in many ways they have not a lot of similarity at all. And in terms of how we rewire around it and how these things chemically alter the brain, that's a big difference. And I think, as you say, like, hope is the fuel source of recovery, and no one should be taking away anybody's hope in this process. It's a necessity.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we said right at the start of the episode, there are some, there's a bit of chat going on in professional circles that does take away that hope by basically making you feel like it's not actually possible, or it's not likely that you'll recover. So I think it's really important to have people like you role modeling and talking about that experience of it really, really being possible on a deep level and a sustainable level. I'm so grateful for this whole chat. I want people to go check out your work and look at the resources you have. Would you sort of recommend, as like a first step, that people probably need to seek, some professional support to kind of kickstart the process, and they can find ways to kind of access and engage with that through your website?
I would, in terms of people who are maybe listening to this going, oh, is that me? I would first and foremost encourage them to reach out to outfits like the Butterfly Foundation, whether it's their helpline. They also have a really great online sort of chat support, which I think can be, for people, just a little bit more accessible. It feels a bit maybe less confronting than picking up the phone and giving them a call, just to kind of start giving yourself a bit of navigation around this, a bit of like recovery literacy and just a bit of an understanding of what might be going on. The next step is usually going to your GP and getting an eating disorder care plan. It's different from the mental health care plan, which, if you qualify, means that you get access to 40 subsidized psychologist sessions annually and 20 dietetic sessions annually. So in terms of where to sort of start resourcing yourself, definitely psychologist is sort of top of the list. Dietitian for some people if it's helpful. And then if there's more that sort of practical day-to-day support, the thought challenging, the goal setting, etc., that's sort of our role in that coach role. And if anyone's interested in working with us, we usually have a bit of a wait list, but we try to get people in front of a coach as soon as possible. I'm hiring another coach soon, so we'll be a team of 4 in a couple of months. Is beyondbodycoach.com. That's our website, or you can find me on Instagram at What Mia Did Next, or TikTok on What Mia Did Next. That's more so women's safety, feminism content. Eating disorder content is more so over on Instagram. And we also have the Beyond Body podcast on YouTube, where we do fortnightly episodes, but that's all under What Mia Did Next on YouTube too.
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers, or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion, though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later. Okay, beautiful. Thank you for that. Oh my God. Yeah, I wanted to do a whole nother episode talking about the safety stuff and all of this, the other things in your wheelhouse. So if you ever want to come back on, I would love to chat some more. But thank you so much, Mia. This has been an awesome chat, and I really appreciate, going over time and you being so generous with your energy.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is freyagraph_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraph.com/freebies. Anyway, later, labial legends. See you next time.